Hello and welcome to another episode of On the Payroll. This is where I talk about all my favorite topics, which is project management, project delivery, consulting, Salesforce, leadership, great teams, and just doing great projects. And today I get to speak to somebody I worked with before at Capgemini. Her name is Maya Kaye. She's also a senior project manager, and we just dive deep into things like methodology and what makes a good project manager and how she's dealt with some of the most challenging projects, the lessons she's learned from all of those, and how to deal with different cultures and different people. And in a world where we're so distributed and so remote, how do you make sure that you get everyone on the same page so that you can deliver great projects? This was something I could have carried on talking for quite a while, but we had to stop somewhere. So I really hope that you enjoy this one. I think you will, particularly if you have a project management brain, or if you enjoy things like that. Well, I do. So you can tell I was totally pumped up during this episode. Thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoy this. Hi, Maya. Thank you so much for making the time to sit down and record this podcast for me. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very flattered and honored, Kay. It's been great fun working with you and now catching up again. It's really a pleasure.
I likewise as well. I think we started around the same time at CAP, and I was so excited to find another engagement manager starting the same time as me. And then we went through lots of things together, and it was really good to have you as one of my peers. So this is a good opportunity for me to dive in a little bit more into your journey. So I would love to hear your story of where you came from and how you get to where you are today.
It's actually very interesting because I believe that what I do now is very much linked to what I started thinking I'm going to do, which I guess almost 20 years later, not a lot of people can say that. When I was thinking what I want to do with myself, I really liked manufacturing. I liked processes. After the army in Israel, I went to work for a factory, and I was literally an assembly line worker. And I looked around and I saw there was a chemical engineer, and there was marketing, and there were the finances, and there were the logistics. And I actually looked at the COO and I said, that's what I want to be. What do I need to be that? And then when I went to look for a career to study, I chose technology management because that had in it elements of industrial engineering and computer science and HR and corporate law. And it gave you like a rounded view of what it is to work for a corporate company. So I graduated 4 years of Bachelor of Science in Technology Management. And actually, I, throughout my career, very much started and touched on project management. So at my first job, I was doing financial control, and I was working in the aviation industry. And then in my second job, I moved to a consulting company for project management. So I was helping them improve MS Project, and we were doing customized development of MS Project to help project managers. So I was a consultant going around high-tech companies, teaching project managers how to use better or easier MS Project to manage their own projects. And after that, I joined Amdocs, and I was also in the consulting division. And there I was a PMO, and I was part of the ISV. So I was part of the internal development of the software, not so much the implementation of it. And then with that company, I moved to Mexico, and I was part of the site management there. So I was working suddenly client-based to try to get from the client all the inputs that we needed. And then I moved to NICE, who do call center optimization. So everything that has to do with the call recording and workforce management and interaction analytics to try to analyze big data and understand how to get information. And there I was customer business manager, which is basically original customer manager or customer success manager, it's called. And then I moved with them to the UK, still with NICE, and I became a program manager. And I was working for several financial institutions and utilities companies. And from NICE, I moved to Salesforce. Salesforce, the mothership ISV company. I was an engagement manager there. And the interpretation of Salesforce for being an engagement manager is predominantly sales. At that point, it was about 80% COE and answering to being the service hand of a requirement and needing to create an SOW and create the whole framework around the proposal, the service proposal. And then I moved to Capgemini for the past 4 years, where I implement Salesforce in multiple clouds, multiple verticals, and really each project is so different. It can be a different financial model, whether it's time and material or fixed price. It can be our role there is completely different. Sometimes I'm a delivery manager managing loads of tiny staff augmentation engagements. Another one, I am managing agent. So we actually, as Capgemini, don't deliver anything. We're the overhead layer that manages the third-party suppliers for a certain client. And even once I got borrowed for Microsoft Dynamics because I could. So suddenly I started learning about Dynamics F&O, which is financials and operations, which I didn't know before. So Capgemini definitely is a roller coaster of opportunities with a very big variety.
Wow, I really like hearing everything that you've done. It sounds like it's predominantly project management, and that's the thing that is you. And to say that, oh, I want to be that COO, how do I get there? It sounds like pretty focused. Your career journey has been pretty focused on it. What is it about project management that you like so much?
I have to tell you, I think I've taken it to the extreme. I feel that in my personal life, I also project manage my life. I like planning. I like order. I like the predictability. And I like to have a team. In my personal life, I like friends and company and family to create a team. I'm very much stronger in being either a team lead or taking part of a team rather than being an individual contributor. I feel lost if I can't like talk to other people and throw ideas around. So that's really something I enjoy. I also enjoy helping people. A lot of my career, I wasn't hands-on project manager, but I did aspects of project management, and I felt that one of the best parts is solving problems. And another part is obviously communication with clients. So understanding what they need, being able to deliver to their requirements, being able to shape their needs so they get the best of what they bought and not go and scatter from the amount of requirements that they have. Um, and I like the fact that there are a lot of methodologies. When I learn more about Agile or about Scrum or about CAF, it makes sense.
So just for the listeners, CAF is the Capgemini Agile framework, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So methodology is something that I really like talking about. So in your tenure as a consulting project manager, what sort of methodologies have been the most effective in the projects that you've worked on?
I have to tell you that it's not only about being a consultant. I think it has very much to do with what you're implementing. When I was working in NICE, that was almost 10 to 7 years ago, it was predominantly on-prem. So the servers were on location. It wasn't cloud-based like it is so much leveraged today. And the system that I was implementing there was more plug and play. The configuration was more hardware, or um, it fit the waterfall methodology. Here, working on Salesforce implementations, because it's such a varied platform, I feel that agile and the iterative approach is so much more suitable. I think if you try to implement Salesforce with a waterfall methodology, it's taking uh, around a peg and putting it in a square hole, because you're trying to fit it, but actually there is absolutely no way that you know what you want from the system from the beginning up to the end, that you get it into your hands and start playing with it. So that flexibility, I think, is very much what I lobby for when we need to create proposals for clients. And that's how I manage my projects. So even if I do have a fixed scope project, I will try to have an iterative approach of development and testing with the client, so they will see it as early as possible, and they would raise any problems that they have so we can fix them earlier rather than later.
Let me drill down into the nuances of that. So if I look at the projects that I've been on, we generally do have a discovery right up front. And it's only then that we do iterative, which is not, in my opinion, not pure agile, because for pure agile, you need to deploy to production after every sprint. So my opinion, and I'm happy to have that conversation with those who have maybe worked on much, much larger projects, like for yourself, you've worked on using CAF, which I haven't, is that what I've found uh, is that larger, more complex projects that have got elements of data migration and integration doesn't fit very well into a pure agile delivery. Would you say that's about correct, or do you have a point of view on that?
I have to say, it's very much, in my opinion, my experience, there have been very, very rare cases where you can actually stick to the methodology of pure agile. I think in almost every project I needed to manage, there were some elements you needed deep planning at the beginning, and only then you probably can introduce pure agile when you're doing DevOps, when something is already very much big baseline deployed and the increments are small. When you need to build from scratch, when it's a new org in Salesforce and you literally need to create it from the basic platform, or when you need to do a transformation, the planning in the beginning needs to be thought in many different levels. You need to understand the architecture, you need to understand the business change elements, you need to understand the marketing elements of how that system is going to be used, and you need to consult with the user representatives, depending on whether that system is very much UI based. You need to have UI workshops to literally mock up and draw up as much as you can the expected user experience, because if they have a vision in their head, nothing that you can write in words will be as strong as trying to mock up something for them to see it in front of them. So again, it varies. Like if it's an e-commerce implementation, I would strongly invest in a UI workshop, because it's so much driven by external customers looking at a website. If it's an internal system, again, trying to understand what is the day job of these users. If it's a utilities companies, like let's say a water company, these people usually started when they were 16 and grew in that company. So there is a mindset to understand in terms of the objection to change, in terms of the measurement of how their job is measured. If they until now were able to hide different aspects, and now things are going to be a lot more visible and measurable and reportable, people are going to object. And it's all a puzzle to try to drive your client to think about these elements and to say, I can help you with all of these elements, but I suggest you handle them in a certain way, whether you have some sort of dedicated team to work on it or you want us to help you out, but please put some thought into those parts.
That sounds like a broad range of projects that you've been on, and you can draw a lot of experience from that. Just looking back, you don't have to go into specifics, can you share your favorite project and why it's a favorite one?
It's very hard. I have to say, probably my favorite project was an e-commerce project of developing a COVID test management system. It was probably the most challenging one because the government kept changing the requirements of my system. So it wasn't even up to the client. I couldn't go to the client and blame them for changing the requirements because they were led by the government response to COVID. So it made it very relevant. And literally everything that was on the news was very much reflected in our system. It was exciting because I was working at C-suite level because it was a growing company at an exponential level. It was very challenging because we started with an MVP and then we grew it to a 5 million size project. So it exponentially grew. The number of team members grew. And like I said, I think we built a good relationship with that client that they listened to all kinds of aspects that I said that we need to think of. Like when I mentioned, how about we listen to penetration testing? How about we try to identify how we deal with this element? They listened and they gave it some thought. And I felt that was very good collaboration towards getting them to where they wanted.
So it was successful because of many elements around it being challenging, it being relevant, and also that the client actually bought in and listened to you to help make it a success.
It was very challenging, obviously. There were a lot of times that they didn't understand why we're taking so long to do something. Obviously, the client never understands the technology in detail. So it's this balance of not drowning them with details, but also trying to reflect the difficulty or the complexity of a certain aspect of a feature that they wanted.
Let me ask you a slightly different question. Again, you don't have to provide specifics, but can you share a project maybe that in your personal opinion wasn't as successful, and one that has changed you the most?
Changed me.
Maybe change your outlook or change how you approach people or certain scenarios, something that taught you the biggest lesson. So most of the time people say failures are the biggest teachers. So that's what I'm trying to draw out, whether there's any.
I was managing a project where literally I was brought in to save the day. It was already escalated. We had the most unfortunate set of circumstances possible. We had the project was sold as a fixed price and fixed scope. It didn't go through the right approvers. There were some changes requested by the clients that were made without consultation with the appropriate parties. When we started the project, it didn't have any governance, so there wasn't a project manager sold as part of the deal. When they did the scoping sessions, there were no notes taken. So literally, if you needed to go something, you needed to go back and listen to hours and hours of recording. The person who led the scoping session resigned. The other person who was the architect that was supporting went on paternity leave. So the project just had challenges from every aspect. You had a very frustrated client. They didn't feel that they were heard. They didn't feel that there was anyone on the other side that gives them any feedback or support. And you had a very frustrated team. The project team was very frustrated because they didn't know how to react. They didn't have anyone to go to. and they needed to face the client themselves. Sometimes there were junior parties, uh, junior resources that have never faced that situation before, so it was daunting. So I want to say that that has taught me the most, because it's such a rare opportunity that you can learn from mistakes, right? You literally went into a situation where so many circumstances have gone wrong, that it was just literally the classic lesson learned project, to take it as a case study of what not to do. And we say in the Israeli army that the rules are made by blood. The rules are made by experience of bad projects that go sour. And I think that was the reason I would say that that is the most influential project I had managed so far.
You know, that sounds very similar to one that I walked through as well. And as you were talking, I could feel my, the hairs coming up, just some PTSD from, those sort of products. When you say fixed priced and all the other elements, it sounds like if no notes were taken, then requirements were not really pinned down and the customer's expecting something. And I recall having many meetings about, is this a change or is this what was included in scope, like constantly. Those are really, really challenging. I want to ask you about leadership styles. In particular, the fact that you worked in different countries, so Israel and Mexico and the UK. Can you just share your learnings from the different places that you've been, and how things are done and how you've had to adapt as you moved different continents?
I think that was one of my biggest challenges. So predominantly I worked in 3 different languages. In Israel, I worked in Hebrew with English when we needed to work with people abroad. In Mexico, again, it was in Spanish and English together, depending who you needed to address. And then in the UK, predominantly in English. But I did have colleagues from the Ukraine, where I suddenly used my Russian to speak to. And then suddenly I had colleagues in Capgemini who were Romanian, so I used Romanian to talk to them. It's very hard to work in a language that you're not as proficient. Talking and working in a language is very different. I have to say, in Israel, we're very direct. We're very high speed. We don't sit and plan and are not as diligent to cross all the T's and dot all the I's. We get going a lot faster and we fix it on the fly. It's the pure agile way, right? Where you start with something and you adapt. And in Mexico, the culture is a lot more formal. I needed to learn how to draft emails that were very long, with a paragraph of introduction and a paragraph of closure. And I learned a lot from my sales representatives. So the account execs I worked with were always my go-to people, because they were the people that I felt are the most eloquent and the best way to come across and to bring a point to life was usually done by the account exec. So when I was in Mexico, I was very much liaising with my sales manager and just trying to learn from him, or I would go to him and say, listen, I have this difficult message. How do I write that in a way that's more polite and easier on the ear? And in the UK, I guess it's a combination. It depends who your client is, the personalities, the vertical. Like I said, in different verticals, you would find different people with different styles. But the UK is also, I would say, less confrontational than the Mexican or the Latin culture. And it's in the middle between the Israeli and the Mexican culture. So I'm kind of now taking from both experiences and trying to find my way to fit to the British culture.
Thank you. I didn't realize that you were that multilingual. So just share with me all the languages that you can converse in.
So I speak 5 languages: Hebrew, English, Spanish, Romanian, and Russian.
Wow. So, what's the level of competence? Are they all business language and you can write and speak for work?
So I can work in 3 languages, which is Hebrew, English, and Spanish, predominantly because of my experience in Mexico. And Romanian and Russian are conversational. They're languages that were taught to me by my parents and my family. So in Russian, I can't write at all. I can read only in capital letters. And in Romanian, because it's a Latin language, it's easier to read, and my vocabulary is a lot wider. Also, English and Spanish are similar. So I guess working in Mexico gave me a world of vocabulary that I didn't know in Romanian, because my father never needed to say documentation to me, for instance. So it's this kind of combination between languages that helped a lot as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Just segueing slightly because it's very topical. Share with me we we talked about this one time we had lunch about the origins where your parents came from and things like this. Can you just share a little bit?
So my dad is Romanian. He was born in Bucharest. I was also born in Bucharest, which is the capital of Romania. My mother was raised and brought up in Moldova, which at that time was part of the USSR. However, Moldova was an area where it kept changing hands between the Soviets and the Romanians. And eventually, my mom married my dad and moved to Romania as well. So she lived there for 12 years. They had my sister and myself. And when I was a year and a half, the communist situation in Romania was very difficult, and my parents decided that they want a better future, and we immigrated to Israel.
All of that, I think the history of the person shapes who we are today. And I like the fact that you're so versatile, both in language as well as in leadership style in managing teams. So, CAP's got a lot of offshore teams or offshore, nearshore, and things like that. How do you find managing the offshore team members in India? What do you do? Do you have any strategies to try and? So this is obviously before the pandemic, where there was a clear delineation of video calls when generally reserved for those who are offshore, and we were, face to face if possible. What did you do to try and create a sense of team, of family within teams when they're offshore?
I have to say that I had dispersed and distributed teams almost throughout my career. However, in Capgemini, I think I had 4 or even 5 countries, or different origins. Sometimes external contractors, sometimes third-party companies, sometimes Capgemini employees from different countries. So at a certain time, I had sometimes secondees, so people that were kind of borrowed from a different country. Each one within Capgemini had a different process, but when they're part of the project, they're all the same. It doesn't matter where they're coming from. The main point about working hours was critical. So we had the critical working hours where we said, let's say from 10 to 4 UK, the teams needed to be online and be able to collaborate. And then the additional time we would fit to the different time zones. I was very strict, especially with my client, to make sure that they don't schedule meetings that require offshore presence after 1:30 p.m. Even though I know that sometimes our offshore colleagues would stay longer, but I wanted to make sure that at least the meeting doesn't start later than that, and it's their prerogative if they want to stay later. And I turned on my camera a lot. I tried to show them that it doesn't matter where you're from. I want to know your holidays. I want to know your culture. I want to know everything about what you celebrated. Like today is a national holiday in India. So I have some of my team members off. So when they come back, I would love for them we spend 5 minutes of the stand-up to talk about the holiday and what did you do and how did you celebrate. And it gives a bit of context to where people are coming from. It's not just the name. Something also very important to me, I try to learn their names correctly. I don't call them Joe if their name is um, Jotinder, for instance. I would ask them how they would like me to call them. Um, Sometimes when there's an issue with understanding each other, I would try to reiterate. So they would say something, and when they would finish, I would say, let me summarize my understanding, and you tell me if that's correct. And the other way around, I would try to make sure that if I provide a message, they would reiterate after me, okay, so what do you think the next steps should be? Instead of me telling you what the next step should be. So it bridges a bit of language gaps, and it bridges a bit of the fear, I want to say, because sometimes in different cultures you have a bit of hierarchy, and I want to make sure that within a project there is there are basically there is very little room for hierarchy. So in a project, I would create a project leadership team. So the project manager, the architect, the team lead, the test manager, the business analyst, those are the people that look forward. We look at the next sprints, we look at the next scope. But the team lead and the scrum master are the people that look inside the current work. And if they have an issue, then they can escalate to us so we can then look to incorporate that in the next phases. However, when we have a stand up or when we have an issue, there is no hierarchy. So I managed 34 people, but I had one on one conversations with each of them because it was important for me for them to know that the door is open, and also to understand hidden problems. Like if they don't get along with some of the other team members, I would never know that through stand ups or different calls. But that's my style. Um, when you have a bigger team, obviously, when you start managing in the hundreds, you need to have a bigger hierarchy level. In my experience, I tried to have still keep that personal touch because I feel sometimes you wouldn't get to understand challenges if you don't drill down.
Thank you for that. What are the kind of team, what are the things within a team that you find most challenging to work with in terms of behavior or approach or mindset? What are the things that you think this is creating dysfunction? I don't like it and I need to do something about it. What are the kind of behaviors that you can help highlight? So, you know, when audience listen, they'll think, okay, I need to make sure that I do the opposite. Do you want to share some of your pet peeves?
Let me focus on three. So I would say one of the things that I tried to make sure in a distributed team is that they're able to communicate. Something as silly as an accent. When I had a Ukrainian team lead interview an Indian colleague, I needed to make sure that they understand each other. They can't possibly work together, even though they're both very proficient and professional, if they can't understand each other. So sometimes I needed to make a choice. I always interview the people, not the technical side, but also the communication style, and I provide my expectation from the role. And that's one of the things that I have to say I focus on when I choose which team members to join together in one group. The other thing I want to say is probably um, when you have a personality of a person who's very much an introvert. He doesn't want to speak on the stand-up. He doesn't want to present to the client. We need to understand people's styles. When we distribute tasks, I always ask, are you comfortable to take that task? And if you're not, please ping me offline. And I did have sometimes challenges understanding people's styles or people's comfort level. And it would do an injustice to the client and to the person if you would have someone who's very proficient and is very good demonstrate and do a demo, but he doesn't want to be on camera and doesn't want to be recorded. He's embarrassed. He wants to develop and look inside rather than outside. So I think that's a very important point to understand about people's personalities. um, and I guess the third part is also the conflict between people. So sometimes pure agile, can mean chaos. Some people don't know and like too many opinions. They like to be told what to do. And you need to identify that. You need to identify people that are very good, but they need things broken down to them and they need someone else to make decisions. And other people, you can create mini groups to say, okay, you guys, all three of you are working on this feature. So you will have your collaboration chat, and there is no leader. It's a back-end developer, a front-end developer, and a functional consultant, and they need to work together and distribute the task between them. So you let them self-manage. So identifying the personality, the comfort level of each person, and trying to match that to the overall goal of what you're trying to achieve is, I think, a very important point to dwell on.
Have there been situations where you've had to remove people from your team? How, you just give some examples, how did you manage that?
So there are different reasons, right, that should happen. You have the normal roll-off period where you identify, you look at the scope, and you realize actually that person is no longer needed. I need more of this skill set. So you have a candid conversation. I would talk to that person. I would explain that looking at the scope, that particular skill set is no longer needed. Um, and there is a roll-off procedure, so they can start transitioning the knowledge and creating any documentation that is needed before they roll off. Another scenario is that you have a skill gap. So that person was trying to achieve their goals or to fulfill that particular role, but there are either multiple human errors. So I reached out to that person and I said, if you can identify where you find that you're struggling so we can understand how to help you. We tried to do that within the project team. However, we found that by having that person have someone else shadow or buddy him, it created a deficit in terms of our velocity. And therefore, I involved their practice, so their team, to say if there is someone else that can buddy and help that is not part of the project. That was also something we implemented. And at the third point, where we said, okay, like an improvement plan, right? This is what we need to get done. Do you feel that you're able to do that? We put the right support in place. Let's review this in 2 weeks' time. And if in 2 weeks' time that didn't happen, I needed to tell that particular developer that it doesn't work out for this project. And then I write a review and I try to give visibility to either the resource manager or the next project manager to identify skill gap, to say, A, if that person wants to work on that, this is the gap, or B, maybe that person shouldn't work on this particular type of tasks and he should do other type of tasks next time.
Thank you for that. I really enjoyed what the topic of the discussion so far. Now, if you were to look back and you had a time machine and you were able to go back 20 years and talk to the younger version of you, what would you say to her? Do you think you would have any advice on what not to do, in which case, the things that you've learned, or would you say stay the course, you're on the right track to getting that CEO type role that you've always wanted?
I think the main point I would tell myself is to observe more the politics. I'm really bad at that. I don't look for that. I feel that being myself is enough, and maybe it's a bit naive sometimes. As a younger version of me, I didn't look who's friends of who outside of work. I didn't try to learn how people get ahead. I just felt that you just do a good job and you apply for something else, and if you're good enough, you get it. But I think there are additional layers that you need to work on and be proficient in. And I'm still mastering it. It's not that I will ever finish learning it, I suppose. It has to do with people. I love people. I like talking to people. I enjoy talking to my colleagues outside of work. But I think maybe as a youngster to try to look around a bit more on managing my manager, managing my progression, and not just hope that if you apply for something, you'll get in. So now one of the things I tell my reviewees or the people that I buddy that are new to the company, I tell them own your career path. No one would own it for you. Help your manager open doors for you to achieve what you want to do, but you tell your manager what you want to achieve. Try to set your goals, try to see what your aspirations are, and then you can discuss with your manager ways to achieve that. But it's very hard for a person to tell someone else what their goals should be.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much. I want to be very mindful of your time. So, thank you so much for just making space to talk to me. It's been a wonderful experience catching up and also getting an opportunity to listen to the other stuff that you've worked on and the things that, especially your career histories, wasn't something I knew, or even that you spoke 5 languages. So, that's been great. Thank you so much, Maya.
Thank you, Faye.